Hello, and welcome to episode 163 of the Health Oddity podcast. So, we are continuing our double episode with Dan John and Phil Maffetone. Please enjoy.
I'm very familiar with what you do, Dan. I haven't read all your stuff. And we probably agree on virtually everything. The game for me is individualize. If you're weak, if you're 45 years old and you're weak, we want to get some strength back in you if you even ever had it. And so I want to tailor that approach to that person's life. And I want to make sure they're really getting strong. I grabbed my ergometer because we need to measure before, during, and after the process. And rather than say, well, I could, I feel stronger, I can lift more weight. I've got this is my dry humor. I've got my coach behind me and he fires off a starter pistol as I'm about to lift the weight. And so I could lift, you know what I mean, Dan?
Yeah.
And so I, the whole way back, I realized that people who were doing traditional weightlifting in the gym while trying to train for a marathon, it didn't work. It was a clash. They would lift, maybe they'd lift 2 days a week. Well, if it took them 2 to 3 days to recover, what do they do in that window where their muscles are weak? Well, they run. Well, that's not good because they're weak. The reason your muscles are sore, or the post-workout is soreness, which means your muscles are weak and they're recovering. And so that interfered with the aerobic system. And so that was a big thing for understanding the process for me. And then, okay, so how can we get strong? How did I get strong? And I got strong by lifting big stones when I would turn over more space for more garden area outside. And I'd lift these big stones and carry them 20, 30 meters. That'll get you strong. And if you're not overworking, you don't get weak, you don't get fatigue. So I developed a no fatigue workout, which Dan mentioned, the book, Get Strong, for people who don't want to go to a gym because they're embarrassed. And I don't blame them. They don't have time, they think. And so I say, look, get a barbell, keep it in your living room, keep it in your office. When you go buy it, lift it up off the floor, do 6 quarter squats and put it down. And if you do that once a day, twice a day, 4 or 5 times a day, you're not going to get sore. The next morning, you're not going to be sore. You can do the same thing the next day without interfering with your aerobic system, and you'll get strong. It's a classic biofeedback mechanism. What you're doing is you're saying to your brain, hey, send more messages to more fibers in that muscle to contract. And we know that thin, lean people like me, as opposed to big, bulky people, don't necessarily have the same strength. And sometimes those thin, lean people have more strength than the big, bulky person. Think of the bodybuilders who have these big muscles. A lot of them are very weak. It's amazing. Runners classically are very weak. And of course, the Olympic lifters, they don't want to pack on a lot of bulk because it'll move them up to another weight class, and they don't want to do that. So they learn to get strong without the bulk, and that's what my approach has been, to make it more convenient for people. If you're a runner, have more strength without interfering with your aerobic development. And so if you want to have bulk, I mean, I'd like to look cool, and although I don't have the kind of muscles that really bulk up, they kind of bulk up a little bit, and I look more cool, and it's cool to look cool, but that's not the reason we do it. Some people say, "Oh, yeah, that's the reason I do it."
In your first book, you had this kind of interesting little set. It was a kind of a little thing like, first, the nervous system figures things out. And by the way, that's why linear periodization works for a short amount of time. If you've never benched before, I can guarantee I can double your bench press in a week. Yeah, do it twice.
Yes.
45 pounds, coming a couple days later, you'll do 90. I'm the greatest coach in the world. I doubled your strength. And then I think you went to hormonal cascade. And then I think you said the aerobic changes start to happen. I think. And that's, and I still use that. I only go to 2 steps. So first we teach the nervous system, and Rob Wolf uses that phrase, a hormonal cascade. That's this nice way of saying we don't really know what the hell's going on, but you look that you look cool in your phrase. That's when out of kind of nowhere, all of a sudden your body goes whoop. Can I just ask a quick question? Probably the thing I get asked the most, and I'm probably unique in America as a coach, fat loss. I know it's a very unusual question, but from your insights, one of the things I did like about the first book is you talked about being a fat burning machine. Have you can you give me any updates, any insights? If you give me I think we all know, but would you mind from your perspective, what I have a client, 100 pounds overweight in America, probably a pretty good client because some are bigger than that. But and my usual joke is this, Phil. It took you 4 decades to put it on. Can you give me at least 4 days to get it off?
That's a good one, because that is the trend in healthcare. It took you all this time to get sick. It's going to take you all this time to get better, to get the same amount of time to get. Well, that's a lot of crap. You push the right buttons and it happens way faster than that. Yeah, I've tweaked my approach to fat burning, but basically, our bodies burn sugar, glucose, and fatty acids. And if we burn a higher amount of fat, we're going to take more off out of storage if it's excessive. But if we burn a high amount of glucose and a lower amount of fat, we just keep packing on the fat because it's not being burned, it's not being used, and we are fat storing animals. So that's the big thing. And the lifestyle factor that affects that fat sugar balance more than anything is diet. And in particular, carbohydrates, in particular, because it's associated with insulin. And yeah, we can eat too much protein, but I really have not seen a lot of that, except in the obsessive person who's on a super high protein diet. And man, you've got to work hard to choke down all those shakes to overdo the protein. But there are glycogenic amino acids, and if we eat too much protein, we will produce insulin. But it's basically the carbohydrate factor that we have to moderate. And where your level of carbohydrate needs to be to accomplish that is, like I said, very individual. And as we age, it gets lower and lower. So and the number doesn't matter. The concept of it is important, but the fact that the governments are all pro carbohydrate. I'm writing this paper on pediatric body fat, which is, and it's 70% of kids in the US are over fat. It's probably higher now because those don't include the COVID numbers, which have raised the numbers in adults and children. But when the government is against these kinds of recommendation, when your doctor says, "Oh no, you can't reduce your carbohydrates because we need glucose. We're a glucose-based animal." That's what I was told in in biology in college. We're a glucose-based animal, and you don't question it until you finally come across an article that says, "Hey, we burn fats and sugar." Of course, creatine phosphate for the first few seconds, as you know, Dan. That's what gets those track runners out front in the 400-meter and 200-meter events. But we basically burn fat and sugar, and the game is to burn more fat because we will physically be healthier, biochemically be healthier, and mental, emotionally our brain will function so much better.
There's a big industry in advising athletes, for example, on food performance. But obviously, ultimately, everyone that you deal with as a nutritionist would be a human, But from the strength world, where it's very explosive, very demanding in short-term energy, have you given different recommendations for very high glycolytic exercise, explosive exercise, short duration or very highly intense, like something like wrestling or MMA is just all out, isn't it? I mean, it's not a healthy sport, but it's going to have certain needs. Do you adjust those principles based on that?
I adjust them only in that the person is an individual, and as an individual, I want to apply what they need. The actual dietary factors, could a young college wrestler be on a low carbohydrate diet? Of course they can, and benefit from. And I've been involved in the research about that in sports and young people. And it takes a while to transition metabolically, but the answer is yes. But only because we're individualizing it. But I don't say, well, this person has an explosive sport to that they have to deal with, and therefore the cookbook approach is to do this. I've never done that. So in that regard, no.
Fascinating. Yeah.
The amount of energy you need. This is an area I just have a personal opinion on it, but now that parents in the United States anyway are they're helicoptering our athletes, so they're getting this stuff, so they're giving their kids these powders and potions and all this high end stuff. When I pick up my right foot in the discus, it takes me 1.6 seconds to deliver the discus. I'm pretty sure my energy systems can handle that. I can throw the discus very far in an extremely fasted state. But I think what happens sometimes is that, so if you don't mind me, on explosive, my world, diet should be satiating. It should keep you healthy. And there is no magic formulas for athletic performance. Now, there is one thing that worked for me historically, Phil, is I did do that cyclical ketogenic dieting with myself and some athletes, for power athletes, where you go 0 carbs for a few days. And the reason it works so well, I think, is by the time you compete, you're in such a crappy mood that I think it really helps you throw the discus hammer and Olympic lift better.
Sympathetic stimulation.
Yeah, you're pissed off as hell and you want to fight. I remember one time, I honestly, God, I thought I was going to have a fight with my hammer thrower, Mike. Afterwards, we went out, and of course, the other part of CKD is then you have this massive carb thing. Well, by God, he had 1 beer and some cheese pizza, and by God, it was like he had 75 beers, and he was the happiest person I ever met in my life. So there are some tweaks you can do with explosive sports, but most of the time, if you compile 6 months of good night's sleeps, you've taken care, you had a good bowel movement, you had a drink of water, you're done. That's about.
Yeah. The basics are you've got to cover the basics getting to the day of competition. And if you don't, doesn't matter what else you're doing, it's not going to work. A lot of it has to do with the autonomic nervous system and balancing that sympathetic, parasympathetic. We're all capable of sprinting. We don't have to train to sprint. We're hardwired to sprint. So much of it is already there. and like you say, Dan, the time factor is so short that you know, it's not like we have to build up a lot of energy. It's already there.
Well, that was
And I should mention before we drift into some other topics, in terms of muscles and strength, we've talked about protein, but I need to emphasize that protein needs are often not met. Yeah, there's a weakness pandemic around the world. There's an overfat pandemic. There's a protein deficiency around the world too. People are not getting enough protein, and along the way, along the high carb wave that has been banging into the world for the last the last few centuries, but especially the last 50 years. You know, if you're recommending a lot of carbohydrates, you've got to reduce your fat and protein. Well, in doing that, protein levels have come down and people are not getting it. And those who think they're getting it are getting a lot of it from vegetable sources, which is not good. So, you know, things like eggs, which is probably the best protein we can eat, beef, fish is good, but man, it's hard to get safe fish. When they start, you know, governments are they're so influenced by lobbyists that when they say something, you know it's pretty bad. So when they start saying, well, women between these ages shouldn't eat fish from these parts of the country, you know something is up. So it's gotten difficult to use fish in a healthy way. We don't have control over fish. We have control over the beef. We could get organic grass-fed beef that's been treated humanely, fairly easy compared to getting a healthy fish. So and all the meats, duck, and I don't like chicken because it has the highest amount of arachidonic acid, which is what converts into inflammatory glycosinoids. But eggs in particular, and again, we had that scare about eggs, and it's gone away, but nobody knows it. Everybody thinks, you know, it's such a bad thing. And if you say, do you eat eggs? They say, oh yeah, I eat eggs, but not the yolks. No. Do you eat eggs? And God, if I tell them I eat 5 eggs a day sometimes, or 6 sometimes, they say, no, that's your dry humor, right? No, it's not. I love eggs and I eat a lot of them. That factor that you know, and yeah, we could say, well, you want, you know, 1 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body. You can do that, but ultimately you have to say, well, I'm eating this much protein now. I'm not quite feeling as good as I should. Let me try adding more or whatever. It's got to be individualized.
In your book, you talk about, I think, if you mentioned having eggs with salads, and that was the one that just changed my whole approach to breakfast. It was like, all right, well, let's try this. And I got to tell you, if you have a salad, and it's not just, you know, I mean, but it's got multiple vegetables and stuff, you might miss lunch because I am so satiated. I'm full.
Yeah, a lot of that. Yeah, a lot of that idea came from just and I think it was in college that I realized that our society is eating backwards. You know, we're eating little bits for breakfast, if anything, and then we have lunch, and then we have this huge, massive dinner. And that physiologically just is the dumbest thing. And so let's flip it around. Let's have dinner in the morning. That's where it came from. And I'm doing that. Breakfast is my biggest meal, and lunch. So by the time it's, you know, 12:15, I've eaten probably 85% of the food I'm going to consume that day.
Good. Okay.
I was having recently, Phil, you say about eggs, and I've been having these big omelets, like 5 or 6 eggs, and then mixing in as well. I saw on a podcast recently, you mentioned whey, mixing in cottage cheese in with the eggs and scrambling it all up together and then having that. And that's absolutely beautiful because you get the extra protein from the cottage cheese as well, and then putting various veggies and stuff in. So yeah, something like an omelette. If you like I did have a whole year where I kind of was more or less like carnivore. You know, I kind of just really went because I knew I wasn't eating enough protein. And I did that. And now I've become acutely aware of make sure I prioritize the protein and get enough protein and then build veggies and fruits and everything around it. Because like you say, if you're filling up with carbohydrates, then you're not really hungry for the protein, where you're going to be deficient in. And it's been an absolute game changer for me. You have like a 5-egg omelette, and like you say, you're full for like half a day. You know, you just don't feel hungry, and or a nice big steak with a couple of eggs. You know, it's fantastic. You know, and I thought I was eating a lot of protein, but when you actually look at the grams that you're getting in, and like you say, 1 to 2 grams per kilo or 1 gram per pound is a number that's thrown around a lot. That's actually quite hard for most people to get unless they're really
if they're not aware of it.
You have to be really intentional with how you eat to make sure you get that. Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah.
And just 2 quick comments. One is for people who are just starting, sometimes it's better to take those big meals like you just mentioned, which is kind of like my breakfast, but make it smaller, but eat 2 hours later or 3 hours later. And once you get your metabolism stable, then you can put everything into one meal. The other thing about cottage cheese is it's mostly curds and not whey. So the milk, Little Miss Muffet, milk is made of 2 proteins, curds and whey, and the curds would be the cheeses that we make, and the whey is the little tiny particles that are left after we scrape off the curds.
Yeah, so the whey is the kind of the skimming off the top, isn't it? And then they make that. That's when you use that the whey isolate for the protein shakes and things that you talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, but you should be able to get whey concentrate. It'll be more expensive. But a lot of dairy farmers feed the whey back to the animals because it's the most nutritious part. And that's how they keep their animals healthy.
When I was young and good looking, I worked at a cheese factory up in Logan, Utah, and they would give away the whey for free to the farmers. And it's interesting. I've always joked that I was literally walking past millions of dollars every day that we were throwing away at the factory. And I should have been snorting that stuff,
It's having made cheese for a long time, I could tell you to get the whey, and you only get a little bit, from a gallon of milk, for example, you only get a cup or 2 of whey. And so to get the whey, you've got to go through this whole process of playing around with the temperature and then filtering pouring the milk through a sieve to get so the curds, which are bigger, don't go through. And now you've got another liquid. Now you've got to cook it again. Ricotta in Italian means cook twice. So now you've got to heat the milk again, add some acid or some acidifier to make sure that whey precipitates out of the liquid. Then you drain that off through a fine cheesecloth. And now you're left with primarily water, cloudy water, and there's nothing left. There's no protein left in the water, but now you've got the water, which could take all night to filter through, and you're left with this little bit of whey. So it's gold. It's really gold.
So what are the curds that are in cottage cheese? Is that good for you? Is that not good for you? Is that what is? Because I thought, what's your take on cottage cheese? And that's a very specific question, but
it's good for you if you tolerate it. It's good for you if those curds come from the milk of healthy animals, meaning the smaller cows, not the big. I call them corporate cows. The big white, black and white corporate cows produce unhealthy milk. And the Jersey cows, the brown Swiss, the smaller cows, they don't produce as much milk. So the big corporations don't like them, but the small farms do because they're easier to manage and they have much healthier milk. People, all the bad things we hear about dairy are from the big black and white Holstein corporate cows.
I've got a question about eggs, because I eat loads of eggs, and I read it. Someone put something up on, I think it was on Facebook or something the other day, and it had how much a coffee costs from Costa, or not Costa, Starbucks or whatever, and then some eggs. And like coffee costs twice as much as eggs or whatever, and you're drinking this foamy latte thing when you could be eating these. And somebody commented on it and said that you shouldn't eat more than 5 eggs in a 7-day period or something like that. And I think that's probably to do with cholesterol. So what?
Yeah, they're still afraid of cholesterol.
Yes, and
You're gonna open a Pandora's box here, Pete.
I know, but I know a
the
lot
bad
of people who are scared of that. So what would you say?
That's the media that keeps that myth alive. It's a lie they keep alive because they sell the old idea of selling newspapers. All of that cholesterol stuff, number one, it never had merit. There were some good theories. You eat cholesterol and your blood cholesterol goes up. And if your blood cholesterol's up, you're going to have heart disease. Good theories, but theories, and it's all gone away. Our bodies make more cholesterol than we could possibly physically eat. So it's about being healthy and having a healthy liver so we don't keep making the bad cholesterol. There's really no bad cholesterol. It's all healthy stuff. It's how balanced we are from a health and fitness standpoint.
Pete, it goes back.
That might be a good thing to keep going, because it means if everyone realizes that, then we won't be able to buy any eggs. The price will go up, won't it? Because
we saw that. We saw that during COVID. One of the panicking things was I think it was a combination of the distributors and the farmers, and there was a little bit of a dip in production, and it affected eggs significantly. There were hardly any eggs around in the retail stores, and so the prices shot up. They've come down in the States, at least now. Still high, way higher than they should be. But I'll tell you, having raised chickens for much of my life, I could tell you that chickens are the easiest things to care for, the cheapest things to care for, because they eat bugs and worms and slugs and grubs and basically that's how the yolks get so intensely yellow, all those phytonutrients that they get from what they eat. And so they don't need a lot of room, but they should have enough room to roam. They need water. They need what's natural in their environment, and you need to keep them from being eaten by coyotes. And other than that, they're cheap. And so eggs are cheap, and
they keep you fit as well because you can chase them like Rocky.
Yes.
This is a bigger topic. So I call it the pushback, but if I'm at a party and somebody asks me about weightlifting, which happens all the time, I'll say, you should do this. I heard deadlifts are bad. I've heard squats are bad. I heard bench press is bad. Military is bad. Upright row is bad. Lat pull downs are bad. Of course, chin ups are bad. Coffee is bad. Wine is bad. Eggs are bad. Beef is bad. Whey is bad, by the way. Fruits have pesticides. That's bad. Vegetables have pesticides. That's bad. No wonder people. I mean, and so everything I know is bad. Everything I cling to is and the problem is, where is these research studies about deadlifts are bad? Well, we took a bunch of untrained people, had them try to pull 600 pounds off the ground, and they felt bad after. Well, no shit. and I worry because an article could come out in some silly magazine that you buy for 50 cents at the checkout line, and it'll do more damage than all of our careers combined is good.
Yes. Yeah. And those articles are planted by companies that have a reason to steer people away from that to to the junk food that they're selling. It's usually the junk food companies because they have the most money. And it's so nice to see in the high-end scientific journals today. It's so nice to see, and I've written this, and when I first wrote it, it was a hard sell to the reviewers. They said, "What do you mean?" And now you'll see, sugar is the new tobacco. And I saw recently, sugar's a lot harder than tobacco to get off. Well, it is. And we're continually bombarded by these planted articles, the advertising all over, and we have to fight against that. We have to, and so yeah, if you go to a party, which I stopped doing a long time ago, they usually kick me out. I ask where people learned about, eggs being bad. And so what I've realized is there's two groups of people. There's a group of people that are swayed by all the garbage that's out there in the media and the tabloids. And they don't listen to anybody else. That's all I listen to. That's the problem. And then there are people who say just what you said, Dan. This is bad. That's bad. Everything's bad. And those people really don't care about being healthy. They're not going to do anything to make themselves healthy. They don't care. Their attitude is, you only live once. We're all going to die. And they're too lazy to do anything until they get to be 70 and they have a heart attack or they have a diagnosis that is not good. And they think, God, I wish I'd listened, and it's sad. It's really sad.
Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, has this great little short story called Tall Tales. And if you're a strength coach or a fitness person, you've got to read it, because he talks about where all these tall tales comes. It's always a reliable source. My friend's uncle said, and it's always, I'll be at a party and I got to tell you, my friend's uncle, there's not an exercise or nutrition program in the world that works according to that trusted source. I heard at a party, my friend's uncle said, and it drives the vision of most people. And I'll throw in one other thing too. At the same time I started reading you, I was also reading and listening to Earl Nightingale, the great lead the field, and everyone knows I talk about him. And he said an interesting thing. He said, in any field you're in, it's actually quite easy being the top 5%. And I've used that number all the time. Here in the United States, only 1 in 20 people exercise. Only 1 in 20. So to be a top 5% in fitness in America, a couple of days a week, you just go out the door and walk, and you're in the top 5%. The bar to, and when I even with my own doctor, who was a former student of mine, he always says that I'm such a great client because I actually do those weird, I sleep, I drink water, I eat my vegetable. I mean, not one thing I'll ever say. I mean, my mom and dad of blessed memory would agree with every single thing I say about health. They'd be like, well, of course, you have to be an idiot not to know that.
Yeah, it doesn't take many generations to go back. And of course, we didn't have junk food on every corner back then. But still, across the globe, all the traditional diets from our grandparents in all those cultures are gone. I did a study in India, and I showed that 80.5% of Indian adults were over fat. Really? And how did they do that? Well, they didn't do it. We did it. Westerners, especially in the US, and Dan, you remember the TV commercials when we were little, 25 cents a day will feed, all these children. Well, what were we feeding them? What were we sending them? Big sacks of white flour and white sugar.
White rice, white sugar,
and we changed their genes in a couple of generations.
There's something really interesting. I was in Vienna for a weekend a few years ago, and this happens all over the place, obviously, but like that just happened to be where I was. Because unlike you guys in the States, we can just fly to Europe and stuff like that dead easily, and it's like an hour away. You fly for an hour, and you're still in the same state, aren't you?
Still in
But
the
anyway,
same place.
I was in Vienna for the weekend, and basically it's Wiener Schnitzel, dumplings, and that's pretty much it. There's not much variety of food around there. So I remember walking past a McDonald's, and it was just full of Chinese tourists because they didn't want to eat Wiener Schnitzel and they didn't want to eat the dumplings and stuff. They were like, well, we're not going to eat that. And there was no Chinese restaurants anywhere and all of that stuff. So they were just McDonald's because that's what they know. And it's like that now globally, isn't it? You go to any city and there's a Starbucks, there's a McDonald's, there's
everywhere.
There's thing. So what you say, like, yeah, it's a massive influence. And it's really, I find it really scary because when I go to somewhere, I want to try and sample the local food and the local culture, but it's getting harder these days.
It's big sugar, bigger than big tobacco. Yeah, when I went to India a few years ago, I did I don't know what I had a lecture tour, I guess, and I met with the Indian public health department, and I had some data that was really good, some Indian data on waist circumference, and I said, look at all these numbers. This is amazing how high the overfat pandemic, and I didn't know it was up into the 80s, but it was interesting because whenever I try, and I love being in Europe for the reason you mentioned, you can take a short train ride and be in a whole nother culture. But I when I travel, I would, before I would agree, I'd say, well, okay, yeah, I'll come, but here's what I want. I want to stay in a nice place, not in a traditional hotel because I'm going to be there for a week or whatever, 2 weeks, and I want to eat the traditional food, but I don't want any sugar. I don't want any processed food. Well, I went to India, and man, they were so dedicated to that, to my request for Indian food. And every town I went to, wherever I stayed, the chef would come out and say, well, I'm going to make you this. It's not going to have any of that. It's going to have all the traditional things. My grandmother used to make this, and it was the most amazing cuisine I had for those almost 2 weeks, I guess. The spices, and I didn't realize that they made the most amazing red wine in India, and they grew the most amazing coffee. So
we've just been watching over here. Just I know we'll start to wrap up, I think, Paul, won't we, in a minute, because it looks like we've been on for a while. But there's a show on Netflix at the moment. We talked about it last week. This Live to Be 100: Secrets of the Blue Zones, which is kind of like a documentary. And I know the Blue Zone, but I don't know, a lot of it's maybe been debunked and stuff. But it was quite a nice program to watch, And one of the things that was interesting was the guy, when he originally wrote the book, I think it was about 20 years ago now, and went to Okinawa. So in episode 1, they go to Okinawa, Japan, and show the people in their 90s and their hundreds and things there. And the last episode that I've watched, he said now 20 years later, that's dropped. The Okinawa, just in 20 years, has dropped out of all of these health stats because there's so much westernization and so much fast food, and everything's changed massively just in the last 2 decades. So when he originally wrote the book, a lot of them were a picture of health and there wasn't all this fast food and stuff. But now, just in 20 years later, the health of the country or the region has declined massively because of this sort of takeover and this, what seems to be happening everywhere, So, it's interesting. Yeah.
There's a couple of things. There was an interesting number that floated around. Really, Phil, when you came out with your first book, the one I read, it was the number that they if in 1887 you lived to 45, you lived to 71.2 years or something like that. Okay. In 1987, if you lived to 45, you live 72 years. So in 100 years, if you live to 45, so that's childhood diseases, that's war, that's, we'd only added months to life. And so one of the things you always have to be careful with any these century studies is that you got to be careful. Also, too, we also know that those in the Russian area, those people weren't living to be 130. They were stealing birth certificates, so they didn't get drafted. Okay.
Yeah.
But I was in Okinawa for a while with the Marines, and my breakfast, I probably had, even then, was probably 20 different vegetables. But the biggest thing about the Blue Zone thing is this: respect for the elderly. And I'm already at 66. 66 is ancient. I get it. Already, I'm starting to get the little jokes about these little shots at me because of my advanced years. I got the old dog new tricks line from a school not long ago. So as much as I like the Blue Zone stuff, and I did watch I always want to asterisk everything, I still think DNA is a major component for aging, but I also think this weird concept of respect. As long as I feel like I'm a valuable person, I'm going to keep coaching until I wake up one day and I'm not alive.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. The R word is such a bad thing in globally. People ask me if I'm retired, and I say, "What does that mean?" And it's like, all right, he's kind of quirky. Let's go over there. But two quick things. We control a lot of our DNA. We control our genetics through our lifestyle significantly. So if we have a gene for cancer, that gene is going to either express itself or not, and we control whether it does in a significant way, not 100%, but in a significant way. The other thing that's really, really important that we always have to pay attention to is that we don't want to just live to be 90 or 120 or whatever it's going to be. We want to have a quality life until the very end. We want to have a high quality of life. And this whole idea of having nursing homes and, people retiring at 65 and then they go downhill quickly for 20, 30 years. It's just criminal how our society has twisted things around, and we spend so much of our life in a low quality state. And like I said earlier, our brain should function quite well until the end, and our bodies will function well until the end. But we're not going to sprint 200 meters in 21 seconds anymore. We're going to sprint 200 meters, but it'll be at a slower pace, and we are in charge.
We are in charge.
Yeah, brilliant.
Can I just add up on that? I have this little thing, Phil, called this inner circle. It's a weekly meeting with some people, and it's wonderful. And one of the things we really focus on is and I'm very candid about my biggest fear, and it's my daughter Kelly saying, "Oh, look, Dad, there's bingo on Tuesday nights. Oh, look, Dad," and that's me to put in a home. And it's funny to think that, because when I was in Vermont, I was talking to my niece, and so I'm 1/4 Abenaki tribe, and so my niece and I agreed that if it comes to that, there's our home is called Island Pond. I'm going to swim to the island. That will be with a weight vest on, and because the choice between being told, "Look, Dad, they have Jello on Wednesdays as dessert."
That's how the animals do it. They just wander off.
Just
but my old friend George Sheehan would say we should live to a point and be like the Sphinx. Just one day we just turn to powder.
You knew George Sheehan?
Yeah.
I got to tell you, I have a couple of his books. What a glorious writer. What an insight. His ability to combine great quotes and just funny stories. His diet advice, by the way, and I've mentioned it before, his biggest key to his diet was to have a bowel movement for his run. That was his number one quote. You can't not read that and just look up and go, this is special. What a great writer. I still think his work stands up to the test of time. And he did the artwork, right, for your first book.
He did the forward to one of the books.
But he had the same art.
His daughter did the artwork.
Oh God, the picture you have of aerobic sex is
that's it. It was like it took so long to explain what I wanted to do, and she said, wait a minute, they're wearing a heart monitor. Wait a minute, like
they're both wearing heart rate monitors in bed, and it's like it's time for sex. It's just
no. One of them's looking at the watch, and one of them says, "Let's try to stay aerobic this time."
Yeah.
And it was interesting because all the men she drew looked like her father.
That's why I thought it was George Sheehan. Okay. Oh God, yeah. I should have prepped this better. And by the way, this is your second edition, okay? This is the second edition, not the first one. And
yes, the first one was everyone is an athlete, and the surveys that were done afterwards that went to the readers, a lot of them said, well, I didn't read the book, I bought it, but I didn't read it because I didn't think I was an athlete.
It's brilliant. And this would be the chapter.
That's the chapter head.
That's where fitness is the ability to do a task. Health is I always say the optimal interplay of the human organs. And I think you said
good that. Short definition. Yeah, something like that. All the systems in harmony.
In harmony. And the issue we get is I'm the fittest person in the world is the Olympic decathlete. Well, no, I've been around top end decathletes. They're not healthy at the end of the 2 days. CrossFitters have a shelf life about 18 months. They're not the marathoners. Literally, I mean, you mentioned the story of the young lady who at the Nationals committed suicide during the race, right? I mean, do you remember that? That's a long time ago, but she ran the track and ran off a bridge. So I love that line, and God bless her. But fitness, and you can't always see fitness. Arnold maybe was fitter than a lot of other modern bodybuilders, but who knows what's going on inside the systems? It was great.
Brilliant.
Great.
Right. Yeah, well, fantastic. Well, I think that's a place to wrap up. I mean, wow, what a great opportunity to get you guys together.
This was a lot of fun, and we barely scratched the surface. But
Bill, would you come back and do this again?
Sure. This is a lot of fun, and a lot of it is it's different, but it ties a lot of things together, which many times if I do a podcast on marathoning, you almost have to work hard to bring in the other topics, but a lot of, especially in the running community, all people want to hear about is running. So you bring in other things that are really important, and now it's applicable to everyone on earth, not just weightlifters or athletes or whoever. It's everybody should listen to this podcast because they will benefit from it, and if they listen to it twice, they'll benefit from it more.
And would you agree, Phil? I wish we could work out something. People like to put a little line, and they like to put endurance over here and strength over here. I worry about that, because what it gives is that it becomes either or, black or white.
Yeah, it's the same thing with track and field, and therefore high intensity interval training. And I had somebody ask me on a podcast, I don't know, it was probably a couple of years ago. You know, my people know me for the aerobic stuff in those circles, and they say, well, therefore he's against fast training or interval training, and I've never been against interval training, and I even wrote a chapter for Paul Larson's book called The Science of HIIT. And people were surprised, like, wait a minute, aren't you I'm not anti anything that's healthy, and high intensity training can be very healthy. I've done it a lot.
Sure. And like you say, in this book, which I but you better be ready for it. You got about a 12-week window to play with it, and then you better be ready on the other side to deal with it. Would you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. It's all about balance, and people should know intuitively, but they don't. So we need to wean them into that and make their brain better, so that at some point they don't have to follow a schedule anymore, because they know that it's only 10.5 weeks, but I'm going to stop now because that's what my brain says I should do.
That's that
very
biofeedback
important
loop.
That's
yeah. And if you ignore it, well, you're gonna you better learn it sooner, because you're gonna pay later. Yeah.
I think it's fascinating. So many people, to use another analogy, believe, like, how do I get rich? Do I get rich by buying stocks, Bitcoin? Do I invest in businesses? There's so many different ways, and it's like this: we're basing optimal health on principles. And I think what you guys share, anyone can get rich doing anything. It's like anyone can be healthy doing strength training, being an endurance athlete, doing yoga. There's so many ways, as long as you're guided by strong principles. And I think that's what's been so fantastic about having both of you on here. Both of you, and I think for all three of us as hosts, have played an integral place in us discovering what kind of character we have in terms of the as trainers, as amateur kind of athletes, and people who pursue our sports, and as people as well. And I think both of you get us to think deeply about those things, which is never a bad thing. I think it's never bad to be reflective and to think about those things. So all I can say is thank you so much, not only for taking your time out over the last couple of years and appearing on the podcast, but also spending time together today to take us through this. It's been for me, it's been an absolute joy to listen to both of you.
Thanks, James. I appreciate it. Dan, finally we get together, although on the podcast. Where do you live, by the way?
I'm back in Utah. I spent a lot of time in Vermont. And were you in Colorado?
I was in Vermont for a long time. Recently, I sold my house 3 years ago, right before COVID, and I haven't been able to find a place. I spent a lot of time in Colorado when I was very active, because a lot of athletes would go there in the summer, and I spent the summer there. Not a bad place to be in the summer. And a lot of my books I wrote, I would take like a couple of days off and go up into the mountains and just write for 2-3 days. And a lot of those books you mentioned came from the mountains of Colorado. I climbed one of the 14,000-foot peaks, and Colorado was sort of my second home.
James, would you mind sharing? Phil, would you be okay if James?
Sure. Yeah. I was going to say, let's all keep in touch.
Yeah.
Share the emails.
Yeah, I'd love that. And make sure you have his site linked in. It's very good. The thing I like about your articles they're always, boom, here you go. This is something you should know. I like that. I overwrite. I'm worried that someone won't understand every nuance I start with in the beginning on everything. I can't help myself.
Yeah, I overwrote for years. Interesting that when I became a songwriter, I stopped overwriting. My writing got better because I was a songwriter, because it's sort of what happens in the brain. But it's interesting to learn to write less and and give people more.
Yeah, I'll continue to strive for it on that.
That's the easy strength and math method summed up, isn't it?
It is. I mean, the Maffetone method, easy strength, it comes down to, I mean, honestly, would you say the 3x52 method times 20 years? I mean, it's just, you show up, you get the work done. Don't be in a hurry. Yeah, I love that line. You know, how are you going to run a 1,000-mile race? Well, I'm going to start off with an all-out sprint and get way ahead of the rest of you. Yeah, and let's get good luck on that.
Yeah. It's all easy once we get rid of all the garbage that society drops in front of us trying to sell us something. It's all really pretty easy because it's intuitive, it's natural. It doesn't get any more easy than nature.
Thank you so much, guys, from to have both of you on. I know
you're fabulous. We've been and for you gentlemen, and the word is used, we can use as loose as possible.
Yes.
We've been previewing this for weeks, and we'll definitely do it again in the future, because it's just so lovely. I mean, Pete, you want to say anything just before we wrap up?
There's something very quickly. There's something Phil said at the beginning about art is never finished, right? And Phil's a musician. The band Orbital have a track called, it's called Satan, but it's not satanic, put it that way. They're a kind of dance duo, and they've released a new version of it because they've been playing it at gigs for 30 years, and over that time they've tweaked it slightly, and it sounds completely different 30 years later what they play. So they've released it again, this new version of it, and they haven't changed it very much, but over 30 years it's completely different. And that's life, isn't it? That's when you said that, it made me think of that. So
yeah, that's a good analogy.
You can use another one. Paul Simon recently re-recorded The Sounds of Silence, and it sounds nothing like the 1964-65 version.
And his first version, which nobody even knows exists, called the Paul Simon Songbook. All those early songs he recorded in London, just him and the guitar. Sounds of Silence. But I should say that Paul Simon at 80, is he 82? Here's a guy who comes out with these amazing new sounds throughout his career. At 82, comes out with a new album, all new sounds, the most amazing guitar playing, the most amazing album from Paul Simon you've ever heard. Please listen to him.
Absolutely.
I've got to say this because it's in my head. If you don't know Both Sides Now by Joni Mitchell, the original that she did, and then the one she did in the early 2000s. What an amazing, I mean, wow. I mean, I was listening to it again recently. I just got to get that one in if we're talking about this. Anyway, we'll leave it at that. Okay. Well, thanks for listening, guys. It's been Health Oddity. Tune in next week. Subscribe, like, share this podcast. I'm sure you will, because it's just been such a fantastic podcast. So see you next week.